Calcium hydroxide is a relatively inert, inorganic compound with a multitude of uses. I am most interested in using it to synthesize potassium chlorate, which I will show in a future video. In the synthesis of calcium hydroxide, we can either start from calcium carbonate or calcium chloride. If we start from calcium carbonate, it's actually quite a wasteful way to make calcium hydroxide, and we end up having to make calcium chloride. The only reason why this method is being shown here is because it is a lot easier for many people to get calcium carbonate. If you can though, I would highly suggest that you start with calcium chloride as it's much more time efficient and way less wasteful. In this video, I'll be outlining the first method, which starts from calcium carbonate, but if you start from calcium chloride, just fast forward a little bit through the video and you can start from there and ignore the first few steps. Here are the chemicals that are outlined which you will require for each method depending on which you want to do. You'll probably notice that method 1 requires more sodium hydroxide than method 2. This is because in the first step, when hydrochloric acid is used, we use an excess, and in the second step, when we add the sodium hydroxide, we need to use another excess of sodium hydroxide to use up the excess of hydrochloric acid that was used in the first step. The first thing to do is add about 180 grams of sodium hydroxide to about 300 milliliters of water. With strong stirring, stir this until the solution is completely clear. The dissolution of sodium hydroxide is exothermic, so we do this first to allow time for it to cool. Add about 360 milliliters of concentrated hydrochloric acid to about 500 milliliters of water. And weigh out about 200 grams of crushed calcium carbonate. With strong stirring, slowly add the calcium carbonate to the hydrochloric acid solution. The reaction that is occurring is shown above. The calcium carbonate reacts with the hydrochloric acid to form calcium chloride, carbon dioxide, and water. Once you have added all of the calcium carbonate, keep stirring until the solution completely clears. The final pH of the solution should be acidic because there was an excess of hydrochloric acid used. Add the sodium hydroxide solution that we made earlier, and you'll see the calcium hydroxide immediately precipitate from solution. The reaction occurring is shown above, where the calcium hydroxide is almost completely insoluble in water. Afterwards, mix the solution around a bit to make sure that as much of the sodium hydroxide reacts as possible. After letting it sit for several hours, the water will separate from the calcium hydroxide. Then, as much of the water as possible was decanted off. The calcium hydroxide was then poured into a large dish. To get the remaining calcium hydroxide in the beaker, you're going to have to scrape it off. However, honestly, you make a lot of calcium hydroxide for not very much money, so I don't really think it's worth your time to scrape every little amount off. After drying in an oven at about 100 degrees Celsius for several hours, this is what it looked like. The dry calcium hydroxide was chipped off, crushed, and poured into a bottle.